Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to take a look at my Phalaenopsis mini marks. I have 5 of them, and this video is the first video of a 2-part series because 5 of them, it takes a little bit of time to go over them without being too rushed. So I hope you'll enjoy this 2-part series, and here is the first video. Let's go back in time to January 2019. At that time, that was still pretty much in the middle of winter in the South, in America, but they were continuing to grow their spikes, so I was really happy, very pleased. But at the time, I remember every day I would look at the thermostat and the humidity meter to make sure that all the environmental elements were constant, because I did not want them to go through any kind of shock and eventually stall their spike growth. These 5 orchids started to shoot out spikes sometime around, I will say, November last year, November 2018. And then it wasn't until early January that you could really see that the spikes were long enough to be visible. And at the time, all these orchids were also growing roots, which I find pretty amazing, because typically if an orchid is shooting out spike, normally they would focus on its energy for the spike versus spending extra energy for root production, root growth, or leaf growth. But at the time, it was just, I guess it was the time, I wasn't sure. So out of the 5 orchids, I have 3 of them that are potted in a smaller container, so those are probably 8-ounce cups, and then 2 of them are potted in traditional 16-ounce cup. So, but they're all somewhat grown in the semi-hydro setups. The 2 that are in bigger containers are the regular semi-hydro method, and the other 3 that are in smaller containers, they are in the semi-hydro hybrid. And by that I mean, as you can see here, I have double cups. I use the double cup method, and if I decide to leave some water at the bottom, then it becomes sort of semi-hydro hybrid. But if I decide that I don't want to have any water at the bottom due to maybe cold temperature or high humidity, or I just feel that they need some additional dry period, then I can just not leave any water at the bottom. So this double cup method really gives me a great degree of flexibility, depending on what I see in the environment, and depending on what I see with the root system and root production. Last year, I only had 1 mini mark bloomed for me, and that was one of the 2 mini marks that are potted in the bigger container. The reason I went with bigger containers for the 2 was because they had better root system, and I thought that they could go into a bigger container, and one of them bloomed last year, and the other 4 took a break from blooming last year. But this year, the very good news is they all shoot out spikes, and eventually, here I'm just gonna tell you, but in video 2, you're gonna see them in full bloom. There is not a single bud blast this year, and it's just an amazing experience growing these 5 small mini marks. And I think they're becoming more and more mature, because compared to all the previous flower spikes that they had, this year's flower spikes are much thicker and longer, and the blooms seem to be bigger than last year's bloom as well. And this year, I finally detect fragrance out of this orchid, and every single one of them too. I finally have fragrance out of my mini mark. But in video 2, I'm gonna share with you exactly how that fragrance is to me in my environment. And here we are, February 2019. They pretty much stopped growing their spikes and were focusing their energy on, I guess, maturing the buds, because all the buds are pretty much growing at a pretty visible rapid speed, except this one. This one is still somehow trying to catch up, because this one is the slowest one out of the 5. And as I mentioned before, 3 of them had less than established root systems, so I used much smaller containers for them. And then 2 of them had much bigger root systems, so I went with a 16-ounce cup to potted them into the traditional semi-hydro method. So the 2 that were in 16-ounce cup or are in 16-ounce cup have the 2 drainage hole on the side, and then the other 3, all the drainage holes are at the bottom of the inner cup. And then I just double cup them to allow this hybrid approach where if I want to have water at the bottom, I can. And 2 days later, February 22nd, 2019, that's when the first flower of all these 5 mini marks was about to open. That was the day that the first flower finally started to open, and I was just very excited. I was looking at this orchid almost every hour when I was home. So I was able to take quite a few photos, and I only included a few in this video to give you a sense of how the progression went. And I really think Mini Mark is a very charming orchid. I really love the fact that it has a milky white background with red dots all throughout the sepals and petals, and then have this really cute lip in orange, right? As we all know, it's really rare to see true orange color in orchids. I know Cattleya aurantiaca is this orange flower, but then for Phalaenopsis, I haven't really seen any true orange Phalaenopsis orchid. So Mini Mark's orange is probably the most orange that I have seen, and I really enjoy it. And what makes it better is that this year there is finally fragrance that I can detect. And here is a side-by-side comparison, right? The traditional Mini Mark on the left, but then also another complex hybrid, but then this one is also fragrant. And according to the seller, this one also, the one on the right, has a nickname of Yellow Mini Mark. And if you put them side by side, you do see somewhat of a resemblance, right? They all have dots, and then they all have that orange lip. And personally, I think the best time to enjoy Mini Mark is in the morning sun, because as the sun shines through the flower, you actually see that white but then also a bit transparent background, and then you can see all the dots very, very clearly. and it's just an amazing sight in the morning when you wake up, and then the sunshine is shining through the flower, and it's just, I can't describe that feeling. It's a very rewarding feeling. Okay, this clip is the first orchid, the first mini mark to bloom. And here I was trying to show you that this orchid is very well established within the media, because after I repotted this into this method, it started to grow out at least two or three really thick roots, and some of the roots, at least two of them, are already into the reservoir. So to me, this orchid is well established, and unless this orchid outgrow this pot, otherwise, or unless it has any root issue, otherwise I'll continue to just keep it in here, because I'm using inorganic media that does not break down over time. So, and I make sure that I would use water to at least soak it to dissolve any unnecessary salt deposit, and then I do a flush once a month with just clear water. So that way I don't really ever have to worry about repot this orchid unless this orchid outgrow this container or is having some kind of root issue that I really have to perform an emergency repot. And this orchid is the most established one because it had bloomed last year, and then the year before when I first bought it. So this spike that we're seeing is the third spike from this orchid. And all these 5 orchids I have are still relatively young, because I got the sense when I first purchased them from the seller, I got the sense that they were just mature first blooming seedling, or near mature size that started to bloom. And this is one of the 2 mini marks with 4 buds this year, and this is the first one to open. So I took a couple photos just to document that, hey, around end of February 2019, this orchid started to bloom. This one, surprisingly, is one of the smaller orchid to begin with, but then this year it actually produced a longer spike than any other ones with 4 buds. This is another one that's double cupped, right? But this one has a spike with 3 buds, and then this is the third one that's using a smaller container versus the other 2 with 16-ounce containers. And here we are at end of February 2019, and here's a short clip from a morning, and I decided to take a video because pretty much all of them had at least 1 flower opened. Some of them had better progress, so some, like this one, is opening its 2nd flower, but every single one of them pretty much had at least 1 bloom opened. So I decided to put them side by side. Well, they were side by side, but I decided to take a photo and a video clip to document that they are all looking very healthy And this is the time that I was very careful about not moving them too much unless I had to water them. But thankfully, because they're in semi-hydro, so I really don't have to touch them or move them at all for about 2 weeks. But for the ones in smaller container, maybe around 7-8 days, I will actually take a look and see if it's pretty much dry. Otherwise, I would just add maybe like a 1/4 cup or 1/8 of a cup of water from on top. So that way I know they can last for another couple of days until I need to water all other orchids. And then I would give water to every single one of them. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!